Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the extra tidbits and information to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where should we go to first? Well, nothing like getting a beautiful sunny day started off with talk of genocide and mass moral abhorrence. This is another great piece by Julia Davis. Julia Davis is the journalist who does translations of the Russian propagandists and keeps an eye on what they're saying when they are on TV on a nightly basis. She's written an article for SEPA here, who, as I've told you before, are the Centre for European Policy Analysis, a non-profit, non-partisan public policy institution based in Washington, D.C., focused on strengthening the transatlantic alliance through cutting-edge research, analysis, and programs. This article is a fascinating read. It's difficult in terms of the fact that it is about genocide. And what's worth noting is the language used by these propagandists is basically Nazism. It's like Nazism 2.0. It really is. There's a dehumanization of the Ukrainian people. There's a desire to eradicate the identity, Ukrainian identity, from from not only maps but from like existence. And what these guys say is not only obviously deeply troubling, but it's looking like it could get them in The Hague for being part of inciting genocide. And advocating for genocide. So this article, morality shouldn't get in the way, Russia's genocidal state media. So let's just try and run through this as quickly as possible. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's elite propagandists wanted to drink champagne in the studio to properly celebrate the moment. Head of state propaganda agency RT, Margarita Simonyan, expressed an overwhelming sense of euphoria and added, "I've been waiting 8 years for this. It finally happened. This is true happiness. War is true happiness. Invading another country is true happiness. Well done, you're a lovely person." With the bloody all-out invasion now in its second year, the euphoria has been replaced by a lingering sense of dread, with Putin's mouthpieces routinely fretting about the possibility of war crimes tribunals. The issue is playing on their minds. Appearing on the state TV show Evening with Vladimir Solovyov, in November, Simonyan said, "Let me tell you that if we manage to lose, The Hague, whether real or hypothetical, will even come for the street cleaner sweeping the cobblestones behind the Kremlin." The same month, Olga Skabeva, the host of the state TV show 60 Minutes, likewise predicted that if Russia loses its war against Ukraine, every Russian will be considered guilty. She argued that a resounding victory was the only way to avoid tribunals in The Hague, criminal cases, and having to pay reparations. So basically, the desire to win is not so much at the moment for some of these propagandists a desire to see those intentions realized, to see Ukraine wiped off the face of the earth. It's actually an existential question about themselves, which is, Russia have to win because otherwise I might end up being in The Hague. And rather than kind of apologize for what they're saying, is of course doubling down and still continuing to say these things, but just hoping to goodness that Russia somehow wins and realizing that you're never going to be able to go on holiday to the south of France again. The Kremlin's propagandists have plenty of reasons to be concerned. Street sweepers and other average citizens rather less so. The agitation for war crimes against Ukrainians described as animals and worse, the descriptions of them as Nazis, and the delight at the attacks on their homes and civilian energy grid have, after all, not been broadcast by people on the street. From the lowliest pawns on Putin's chessboard to the queens of propaganda like Simonyan and Skabeva, the state-controlled media has played a central part in prompting, encouraging, rationalizing, and normalizing the Kremlin's massacre of its next-door neighbors. And the dehumanization in terms of the language that's used when referring to Ukrainians is just classic Nazism 101. The Jews for the Nazis were rats, were less than. Well, this is exactly what we see from the Russians here. And it excuses all sorts of horrible behaviors, such as genocide and torture and all sorts. Examples of such talk, and obviously I'm missing parts of the article, go and read it all, but examples of such talk are easy to find. They proliferate nightly on live TV. Before the full-fledged invasion, Russian state media favored the description of pro-independence Ukrainians as, quote, pigs, with corresponding cartoons featured on state television, where Ukraine's language, food, and traditions were routinely mocked. Since February 2022, I mean, this is just laying the groundwork for justification of this. as I've talked about with cognitive dissonance reduction, like if you're trying to reduce the disharmony between your belief that your core belief that hey, Russia is brilliant and we're great and morally good, and video footage of butcher, video footage of torture or evidence for torture, of looting, of all these things, then one of the main ways to justify that is that these people that this is happening against just aren't humans, and therefore the normal human moral evaluations don't hold. If these people are worms, pigs, less than, then it's all right to do things like that. In the same way, it's all right to eat beef. If you eat meat, it's like they're less than humans. It's not a problem. So if you make humans less than, then you end up being able to do things to them that you would not be able to justify doing to fellow humans. So since February 2022, the descriptions have descended into the realm of open dehumanization. During his show in July, Solovyov said, when a doctor is deworming a cat, for the doctor, it's a special operation. For the worms, it's war. And for the cat, it's cleansing. In other words, Ukraine is the cat, and it's being cleansed. So that's ethnic cleansing there. It's being cleansed. The worms, the Ukrainians, feel like they are at war with the doctor who is doing the deworming. So the Russians are the doctors doing the deworming of the Ukrainian cats and getting rid of those horrible little worms who are those pesky Ukrainians getting it away. In October's RT, so Russia Today, they're one of their main propaganda, well, the state-run TV stations. Director of Broadcasting Anton Krasovsky, and I reported on this. Actually, that video is now one of the ones that's been taken down. I wonder what's been going on there. Suggested drowning Ukrainian children, setting Ukrainian homes on fire with the inhabitants inside, and alleged that Ukrainian grandmothers would gladly pay to be raped by Russian soldiers. He insisted that Ukraine should end in its current form, with its only surviving silver zoned for pig rearing. Krasovsky felt the need to clarify that when he said pigs, he did not mean Ukrainian women. Ukrainians were, and this is according to Pavel Gubarev, the Russian political figure, People's Governor of Donetsk region 2014. He said that Russian people possessed by Ukrainians were Russian people possessed by the devil, and that Russians' aim was to convince them that they are not Ukrainian. He added, but if you don't want us to change your minds, then we will kill you. We will kill as many of you as we will have to. We will kill 1 million or 5 million. We can exterminate all of you. Months earlier in May, State Duma Deputy Alexei Zhuravlyov appeared on 60 Minutes to outline his calculations about the number of Ukrainians to be re-educated by, quote, reinstalling their brains, as opposed to the millions who would refuse to abandon their Ukrainian identity and who must therefore be killed. A maximum of 5% are incurable. Simply put, 2 million people. These 2 million people should have left Ukraine or must be denazified, which means to be destroyed. I mean, if that's not advocating genocide, I don't know what is. There is a widespread consensus in the state-controlled media that this so-called denazification means mass murder. In April, again on 60 Minutes, Zhuravlyov and Skibiva concurred that this process is, quote, accomplished by shooting or ripping heads off. And another quote from this one is Dmitry Rogozin, who said some pretty horrific things. Russia's former ambassador to NATO and former deputy PM for defense and space industry said many years will pass even after our victory before we will be able to secure total loyalty of this population. Turning this extensive territory into Russia will require plenty of manpower, time, and effort, he said. During the same show, military expert Igor Korotchenko surmised, quote, it's obvious that the process of the denazification of Ukraine will take a minimum of 15 to 20 years. He predicted that Russian troops would have to remain on Ukrainian territory with a substantial Russian presence for the foreseeable future. This is open admission, that Ukrainians don't want this to take place and that the Russians will therefore be bending the will of the Ukrainians. So this is not democratic. It's not liberating. You are staying there for 15 to 20 years to forcibly change people's minds, to brainwash them, and to have generations die off so that the new generations can be brainwashed into a Russian mindset. This is complete admission of invading aggressive war. This is an admission that this is not liberation. It's hugely problematic. Obviously, it's morally terrible. Tretyakov, a higher school of television, emphasized. He claimed that Ukrainians have turned into animals and Russia must plan its actions accordingly. It's easy enough to understand the link between talking points that routinely compare the Ukrainians to animals, bugs, or worms, and atrocities like butcher, the torture and murder of Ukrainian prisoners of war, attempts to freeze and starve civilians to death by destroying critical infrastructure and forcibly deporting Ukrainians, including children, to Russia. And that's that. I mean, there's far more to say. I could make other quotes there, but it's just it's terrible. It's really terrible. And this is state television. Imagine turning on CNN and BBC and whatever your national broadcaster is, and having, I don't know, them advocating the eradication of the complete eradication of Mexicans, the complete eradication of, I don't know, Irish people or something like that. Like in this day and age, in this way, and then dehumanizing them to be talking about them in those kind of terms, of animal terms. It's horrific. This is horrific, and this should tell you all you need to know about this war. Again, I keep going back to these kind of simple ideas, like whose side are you on? So all the I'm being infested with pro-Russian voices on my threads today below today's video, my news video today. Loads of pro-Russian shills. Is this really what you think? Because if this is what you think, you are a moral monster. If you agree with this, you're a moral monster. And if you don't agree with this, why are you on my threads advocating for this kind of Russian success? You're a moral monster. End of. There you go. How Ukraine, this is from The Economist, how Ukraine tamed Russian missile barrages and kept the lights on. Ukraine have done an amazing job of not letting these missile barrages set them back too much. They are able to repair their infrastructure, their energy infrastructure, incredibly quickly, and do a really good job of rebuilding and mitigating against the damage that these missiles cause. There's this article in The Economist. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs. Makes a couple of good points. At the start of the winter, Ukrainian air defense could rely only on Soviet-era systems such as the S-300 and the Buk, and a dwindling supply of missiles. When things were bad, it managed an interception rate of just 20 to 30%, and this is when there were more missiles being sent as well. More recently, with the help of new mobile groups and Western air defense systems like NASAMS, that figure is, Ukraine claims, regularly above 75%. What a difference there. What a huge difference. Success on any particular day depends on a combination of factors: weather, the algorithms both sides use, and the missiles Russia fires. Ukraine's new Patriot air defense systems are yet to come online, so Ukraine cannot intercept high-speed missiles like the KH-21 anti-ship missile and the Kinzhal air-launched hypersonic ballistic missile. The use of such expensive and scarce missiles in the attack on March 9th explains a low interception rate of below 50%. It continues. On the infrastructure side of the equation, Ukraine has been helped by brave and ingenious engineering. Ukrenijo's Mr. Kudrytsky says he only ever worried for a couple of hours before he understood the problems would be fixed. His company had deliberately kept backup stock of high voltage equipment when refurbishing substations in the years before the war. Besides that, they were what Mr. Kudrytsky describes as mind-blowing engineering solutions. After drones hit one facility in November, a particularly hard-to-replace piece of hardware went up in flames. There was no obvious substitute in the storeroom, so the technical team decided to attempt what should have been an impossible repair. Quote, in the electric world, if something is on fire at a voltage class of 330,000 volts or higher, you say goodbye to it, said Mr. Kudrytsky. But somehow they managed it. Don't know the details there, but they're obviously doing some pretty good work, ingenious work to to fix some of these broken pieces of energy infrastructure. All across Ukraine, it continues, energy maintenance teams have been going to work in flak jackets and helmets. The working conditions of some locations test nerves of the Maxim Yatsenko, 25, is one of a team of engineers working in Nikopol, a mere 10 kilometers, 6 miles across the Dnipro River from Russian positions at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Artillery barrages are still a daily event. Quote, we've had shells landing 200 meters away and flying over our heads. Sometimes you're already too far into a job to stop. It can be especially difficult on evening call-outs, he explains. The team operate in darkness so as not to present a target. Quote, you have to work by feeling your way around, connecting cables without actually seeing them. These guys are doing a really important job, of course. You know, yes, soldiers are important on the front line. Yes, logistics and maintenance people are super important. But yes, people operating the train lines, people operating the energy systems, everyone plays their part in keeping the country running. And they are doing incredible work in supremely difficult conditions and situations. So that's a worthy bit of deference paid to those guys. Right, Tatar Ragami is someone that I've quoted a few or dipped into a few times in terms of a source on Twitter. This is an opinion piece from him, and it's worth sort of dwelling on. Although my views may differ from those of some government officials, I'd like to express some cautionary thoughts regarding the upcoming offensive. While I remain hopeful and committed to achieving victory, I believe it's important to temper our expectations and avoid the assumption that the war will end quickly as a result of one counteroffensive, a realistic approach that takes into account the challenges that we might face. Even though Ukraine has received substantial support from the West, it's still only enough to sustain a few large offensives. Even if Ukraine successfully clears the entire southern region, it won't necessarily resolve the ongoing issues with Donbass or Crimea. The fall of one area doesn't guarantee the fall of the other. It's important to recognize that the Russian forces are actively preparing for the upcoming counteroffensive, and we shouldn't underestimate their capabilities. Rather than making optimistic statements about how the war will end soon, it's more realistic to be prepared for a potentially prolonged conflict. We should also communicate this to our allies so they can adjust their expectations and support accordingly. This is really important. Look at America. If you're going to get a change of government there in 2024, are they ready for this to be a long-term thing? Will support last that long? Have people's expectations been managed? While I remain hopeful and committed to achieving victory, I believe it's important to temper our expectations and avoid the assumption that the war will end quickly as a result of this counter-offensive. Everyone in Ukraine is grateful for the support we receive from the West, including from both governments and society, but I believe that we need much more to finish this war. This goes beyond just the provision of ammunition and military equipment, as important as those are. In addition to expanding training programs, we must prioritize efforts to improve our command and control structure. This includes sending our reserve officers to the best military schools to enhance their skills. We need to focus not just on improving the command abilities of NCOs and junior officers, but also those at the brigade level and above. I plan to release a breakdown of the analysis made by Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant in his article on the necessary changes to our army to remain modern and successful. Finally, I'd rather hear that the war has ended sooner than expected, even if it means admitting that my previous predictions were incorrect, than to hear that my advice could have made a difference if only it had been heeded earlier. And I think this is a really salient point. This war, the counteroffensive isn't necessarily going to be the be all and end all. It might struggle, and they might not have enough stuff. They might make very slow but methodical progress, and then you've got maybe 400,000 Russians being mobilized to mitigate any successes that might be made. So this will be difficult. It is definitely a case of needing to be in for the long haul and throwing as much equipment at Ukraine as possible in a continued manner. Moving sideways. So this is to just talk about something different. Now for something completely different. A failed Lancet drone strike on a Ukrainian 2S1 Godzik donated by Poland near Avdiivka. So this is self-propelled gun. Actually, it could be a mortar by the looks of it. I don't know. The loitering munition apparently hit the makeshift metal net cover, which led to early detonation. So these nets that they're starting to put over really are working against Lancets. Lancet kamikaze drones are being caught on the nets, explode earlier, and do very little, if if not no damage, to these pieces of equipment. I've been through that. So here we have some more propaganda. Just run through this quickly. This is Vitaly Tretyakov, someone I've just actually quoted from. He spells out what Putin's denazification objective actually means: the liquidation of Ukraine as a state and a partition of its territory. This is quite revealing window into this guy's mind, and indeed what some of these Russian thinkers advocate for. So he says denazification means the liquidation not of the current regime, but of the state in its entirety. So when you heard about Putin originally saying, right, one of the core rationale, one of the core reasons for doing this war, this special military operation in Ukraine, is to one is to protect the Donbass. Has that happened? I think more people have died since you got involved, but there you go. One was to denazify Ukraine, and the understanding there was to remove the Nazi elements, like for example, they were claiming were proliferating the Azov regiment, and so on and so forth. These far right fascist actors who were within Ukraine. That denazification term has now come to mean eradicating Ukraine in its entirety, as is advocated very explicitly here. And that's a really big shift. That's, one might say, a genocidal shift. So denazification means the liquidation not of the current regime, but of the state in its entirety. It shouldn't exist at all. After that, what do we do with the territory and its population? I've already said Novorossiya is Novorossiya. It wasn't invented by me, Putin, or Surkov. It is a historical phenomenon, and it will join Russia. So let's just have a look at exactly what he's talking about there. So this is the area known as Novorossiya, just that kind of whole southern area, your Zaporizhia, Kherson, Oblast going into Donetsk. So that's what he's talking about when he mentions that term. So we're going to have to go back to him. Here we go. It's a historical phenomenon, and it will join Russia. Malorossiya, that could potentially be an independent state. So let's go and have a look at Malorossiya. So to let you know, Malorossiya refers to Little Russia. So Little Russia is this. Well, in a modern context, I mean, this paragraph is important here. The term Little Russia or Rus Minor, Malorossiya, is now anachronistic when used to refer to the country Ukraine and the modern Ukrainian nation, its language, culture, etc. Such usage is typically perceived as conveying an imperialist view with that the Ukrainian territory and people, Little Russians, belong to one indivisible Russia. Today, many Ukrainians consider the term disparaging, indicative of Imperial Russian and Soviet suppression of Ukrainian identity and language. It has continued to be used in Russian nationalist discourse, in which modern Ukrainians are presented as a single people in a united Russian nation. This has provoked new hostility toward the disapproval of the term by some Ukrainians. In July 2021, Vladimir Putin published a 7,000-word essay, a large part of which was devoted to expounding these views. So this is not only what these guys think, but this is actually coming from Putin himself. So Malorossiya, I don't know exactly to what area of Ukraine he's talking about, because he's already talked about Novorossiya down in the south and southeast. Either this is the rest of it or some part of the rest of it. But he says Malorossiya, that could potentially be an independent state, with Kyiv as its capital and under the military administration of Moscow, and with its own government there. This isn't the toughest option for Ukraine. And naturally, security guarantees for Russia. Oh, naturally. And Russian military bases in the territory of Malorossiya. Oh, right. So it's an independent nation, but it gets to have Russian military bases all over it. What planet are you on, mate? And in the very west, Banderite Ukraine, so towards Lviv, that area he's going to call Banderite Ukraine, sort of talking about sort of Nazism here, like referring back to a guy Bandera, who was once a sort of bit of a national hero, but he had Nazi tendencies, to say the least, where all the Banderites should resettle those who don't want to stay here in the underground. That will be the legal successor to the Ukraine of Poroshenko, Turchinov, and Zelensky. That's kind of him. It will inherit all of Ukraine's debts. So we're going to split it into these areas. This is going to be Novorossiya. This is going to be Malorossiya, and we're going to have army bases all over here. And just over here, this is going to be like the Nazi area where they can have all their debts. We're not going to take on any of their debts. You can keep them over there. We're just going to invade and keep all your good bits. Jesus Christos. And Malorossiya will be the legal successor of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Of course it will. He says, sorry, my mouse cursor is not reacting, and pretty much that's with a kind of jump in time. He goes on to say, absolutely unbelievable. That's what it will look like. A strict agreement will be signed for Ukraine's capitulation on those conditions. A strict agreement will be signed. I'm just unsure where in this screed, in this diatribe, that he's allowed for what these human beings want themselves. This is like a despotic approach to rulership. This is imperialism. This is a tyranny. This is an autocracy. This is dictatorship. This is whatever, any and all of those terms apply here. This has nothing to do with allowing human beings to exercise their own volition. And it's incredible. It's incredible to hear people seriously talk in this way. I'd love it. I'd love to just sit down and say, right, you know, Russia, where you live at the moment, the Russian Federation. Well, it turns out that the US is just going to invade. Now, what the US are going to do? They're going to just take this part here. You can live there with all your debts, right? Just over there, just by Mongolia. And then all these bits, Moscow, that'll be part of here and here. How do you feel about that? How do you like that? He'll be like absolutely enraged. Well, now you know what it feels like. So this guy lacks any kind of empathy, any kind of moral fiber. It's just absolutely shocking, really. Right, moving on from that nasty piece of work. Officers of the 93rd Brigade filmed the takedown of the Wagner Su-24 aircraft in Bakhmut using an Igla MANPADS today. The press service of the brigade was lucky enough to see with their own eyes how the bomber was shot down and to film the launch of the rocket at one of the positions. So this is a guy saying, I'm going to run you through what he says because it's 5 minutes. I'll just make it a lot quicker by running through, and I know some of you are listening. So you got them walking into their place with a kind of a building, one of their lookouts. Everything's pretty destroyed in the area. They've got an Igla over their back. The probability that the enemy plane will operate now is low due to overcast weather. In the morning, they only come out when there is sun from the eastern side, so the sun would interfere with our work. Accordingly, this creates limitations on the use of MANPADS. No sun today, and they know it, so it's not safe for them. Yes, there are radars. They can be seen during a turnaround at high speed, but when they approach to strike, we're told that they're coming, and within 20 to 30 minutes, they usually come. But we're not always told. It's mainly about what you can see yourself. For instance, yesterday we were firing at the enemy planes, not letting them complete their combat objective. They flew in, we fired, they couldn't strike our targets and left. Planes are a fast target. They can come in close range, fire at ours, and leave. You need visual tactics as you can't hear them. They often fly at high speeds, so often you see them first, and only later the sound reaches you. And it can happen that we fired at them, they struck us, and they are already turning around. And only then the sound arrives. It can happen that they will cover an assault, but it's mostly the artillery doing the covering. And tanks, but they will work by coordinates, striking bridges or some important buildings. If they discover a headquarters, they may strike using coordinates. This and then he's got the Igla on his shoulder, on his right shoulder, and he's sort of looking at parts of the Igla and explaining how it works. This knob is a power source or a battery in simple terms. It launches the homing head. It snaps and launches a start engine which throws the missile. Then the sustainer engine starts and follows the target. Does it make you deaf? says the interviewer. If you're holding it and firing, then the sound is in the front and back. No sounds in the middle. If you stand in front or back, there will be noise that will deafen you. But this space is not very close. This space is not very close, so it will be fine. He says, standing in quite a small room. But this space is not very close. Cock it, aim, and choose a manual or automatic mode of fire. And then, Bob's your uncle. So I'm going to rejoin it live here, allow it to play. So here he is setting it up, looking out the window. So it sounds like that was the sound of the plane before, and he's launched it. And then this is apparently the success of that shot. One assumes, or at least it's another shot at the same time, somewhere nearby. You have two people in that plane, apparently, as they're just about to talk about, and the parachute of one of them is evident there. So at least one of them survived. I don't know whether that's behind Russian lines or whether it's behind Ukrainian lines. Nonetheless, this was a successful hit. Su-24 taken out, and then the guys in back in the hideout then talk about. So they talk about their great victory, and I'll go through that. Great victory, says one. The effing pilot is alive. They're sort of giving each other high fives or fist bumps and whatnot. This is a really you can imagine these guys. They hang around day in day out waiting to see planes, and they get. I showed you a video of this like months back. A guy doing it in a field, and he's saying, and then suddenly you got 5 to 10 seconds to do everything. And that's you done. That's what you're waiting for. And if you miss it, you've lost your opportunity. So these guys wait an awful long time to get their opportunities, and it's rare for them being able to take it and to succeed. And so they're super excited by that. Justified sort of fist bumps and whatnot. Was there a single pilot in Su-24? He asks. Su-24 or Su-24 has 2 pilots, but one is a gunner. He was flying up and then down. And they're all talking, sort of laughing and whatnot, and being really happy with this. I watched the rocket going like this and already got upset. I saw it. Nice one. And there you go. And that's how it is. These guys have a very short window of opportunity, and it's really important they take it because the rewards are huge. So taking down a Su-24 and at least one pilot is obviously a great boon for that team. Right, going back to propaganda again. Right, how much time have I taken up? I'm over half an hour, so this will probably be my last little bit. This is Scott Ritter, right? Scott Ritter. I've done a couple of videos looking at Scott Ritter's claims and finding them wholly problematic. Same with Colonel McGregor. This guy's a shill for Russia. Now, you're a shill from Russia when you're being paid by the Russians when you're on Russian television talking about your experiences and everything, and giving your side of the story and saying, no, I'm not being paid by the Kremlin. They don't pay me. If they do, I don't get paid nearly enough, type thing. Ha 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 ha. No, you are. You're on Russian state TV, mate. I know whose side you're on. You know whose side you're on. Everyone knows whose side you're on. Anyway, so this is Scott Ritter being interviewed. It's a good 7-minute interview. So again, I'm going to talk you through it. I hope you don't mind for those who are listening. So she starts off by saying, Ritter, you are being called an agent of the Kremlin. What is your opinion about that? And he says, well, if I'm an agent of the Kremlin, the pay is very bad. Ha ha ha. In reality, I'm not an agent of the Kremlin. Hey, funny man. I am an American patriot. I served my country faithfully, honorably for decades. I have to talk about what is happening, about the current situation in Ukraine. I believe that my country is on the wrong side of history, and Russia is on the right side of history. Therefore, we know what every good citizen of the US should be doing. I'm not an agent of the Kremlin. I'm an agent of the US. After I worked in Russia for 2.5 years, interesting, I realized that it was a life-changing experience for me. I stopped fearing Russians. I stopped hating Russians. I started to like them more and more. What happened after the USSR fell apart? We stopped respecting Russia. We stopped seeing Russia as our equal. We started seeing Russia as a defeated party. This changed the dynamics of our interaction. Instead of working with someone normally, correctly, which was very difficult for me because I'm married to a Soviet Georgian with a family in Russia. Very interesting. And I'm witnessing this change in attitude in the US. From that wonderful period of time in the 90s, I already told you, I was taught to kill Soviet weirdos. Something he had said in the beginning, kill a commie type thing. And then we started to work together. As a result, we stopped treating Russians with respect. We saw Russia as a defeated country. This changed the entire perception of the world for the Americans, which is sad. He goes on to then talk about how America supported the Ukrainian nationalists, the Banderites, decades and decades and decades ago, and then when it came to the Ukrainian government and the Maidan, America just deposed the Ukrainian government type thing, and it's like typical Russian sort of approach, typical Russian narrative. But just going to forward on to the end. She says, "What are your most important words for today?" And she says, "Who would you address them to?" His answer is, "Well, we're speaking to a Russian audience, so I want to address the Russian people. Here is what I would like to say. Give the American people a chance. We can do the right thing. But be patient, we will do the right thing. The world will be a better place if Russians and Americans will once again coexist and resume peaceful cooperation." In other words, he's saying, we're not doing the right thing now, which is supporting Ukraine. So supporting Ukraine is the wrong thing. And the right thing to do is work with Russia, which is to allow Russia to invade Ukraine, take over Ukraine, and win a war. That would be the right thing for Americans to do. Scott Ritter, no. No, 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 no. It's just morally wrong. It's politically wrong. And I don't know what compromat the Russians have on you, right? You've got your wife's family, Georgian Soviet era in Russia. You've worked with Russians before. You've been done. I don't want to cast too many aspersions. People can go and look at his past. He's got a very dodgy past with regards to issues with within the sexual domain. And I wonder whether there is compromat on him. I'm trying to work out why someone who clearly is knowledgeable enough, he can talk eloquently enough, right? So why is his appraisal of the situation so fundamentally different to mine? Why is he so unbelievably pro-Russian? Because I don't think you can be unless there's something else going on. There just has to be something else going on. I don't want to get too deep into speculation here, so I won't. But yeah, that's my opinion. Scott Ritter, I don't know that I will ever really give him the time of day. I don't think I'm going to interact with any of his videos and anything he says again, because I pretty thoroughly dismiss everything he says. There's a couple of nuggets within what he says that might be okay, might be reasonable, but it's surrounded by an awful lot of absolute garbage that I have no time for. So anyway, that's Scott Ritter for you. I will leave it here. Thank you for watching this meander through the world of the Ukraine war and Russia, and in this case, Russian propaganda, an awful lot of it in many different forms, in the American form and the Russian nationalist TV propagandists form. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for all your support. Really do appreciate it. And all the ways you can support the channel are in the description below. Take care, and I will speak to you soon.